Hi everyone, my name is Jihan. Some of you may know me as a rental agent at TCS. Today is the first TCS interview where we share the space with DPs, ACs, and other TV and film professionals and learn from their experiences after checkout. Today, I'm honored to be speaking with Henry Adebonojo. His credits include numerous contributions to PBS, documentaries like Paul Robeson, Here I Stand, Richard Wright, Black Boy. In 2001, he was nominated for an Emmy for his work on the documentary Half Past Autumn. In 2016, Henry was invited by acclaimed director Raoul Peck to contribute visually to the production I Am Not Your Negro, based on the unfinished works of author James Baldwin. The film went on to be nominated for an Academy Award in the documentary class and won a BAFTA and Caeser in 2018. Thank you so much for doing this again.
Thank you.
So I guess the first question I have for you is, I saw that you, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I saw that you studied law and in undergrad and you did international law in grad. Now you're making films. How did you make that pivot into film?
Okay, so basically when I was in undergrad, I picked up photography as a hobby. Bought myself, I had what would effectively be called a point and shoot camera at the time that my father gave to me. Mm-hmm. And I decided when I started learning, the process of, I didn't take any formal training whatsoever. So it was all trial and error for me, and then learning from the error to improve. And at a certain point, I felt I wanted to take it more seriously. So I bought a single lens reflex camera, which allowed me to change lenses and that sort of thing. And I began to take it a lot more seriously while I was in undergrad. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that I necessarily had the seduction to creating images visually had completed at that point. So I was still sort of in the back of my mind on track as far as a legal career goes. Mm-hmm. But I think as a result of taking photography more seriously, it made me aware of cinematography in relation to films. Films had always been a part of my life as a kid. I literally would go to the movies twice a week, at least once a week, sometimes twice a week with my siblings. It was an arrangement my parents made where they would either take us or have someone take us to the movies. So I've been connected to movies for a long time, but it was only through photography that I began to become aware of the actual process of creating an image or a series of images, which is what cinematography is. So this was also, at the time, 3 films made a very strong impression on me in that particular regard. One of them was Apocalypse Now. One was Kagemusha, which was a Akira Kurosawa film that Francis Coppola actually was a producer on. And the third one, and the most impressionable one for me, was Blade Runner. And as everyone knows, Blade Runner is a landmark visual film in terms of every aspect of visual, just cinematography, set design, and so on and so forth. And I say Blade Runner most specifically because it was the last in that series of films that I saw during that period of time when photography was becoming part of my makeup. I think by the time Blade Runner rolled around, I had actually gone from undergrad to postgrad. And I think somewhere along the way in postgrad, I realized that this is who I am. I'm an images person. I just didn't see myself in the career, in traditional career at that point. But, I completed my education because that was the bargain I had with my family, so to speak. And I was studying in the UK at the time, so I moved to New York after I was done with postgrad, and I did try to formalize my situation as a lawyer by taking the bar exam, and it just so happened coincidental to that. Actually, I'll back up for a second. When I arrived in New York, I, amongst other things, got a job. It was not in the legal profession. I was working with a stockbroker doing research down on Wall Street. And at that time, I expressed my interest in film to an uncle of mine. just primarily as a curiosity. And he introduced me to a friend of his who was a documentary filmmaker, a gentleman named Bill Miles, who had made a film that I was actually aware of, a documentary film called I Remember Harlem. And I met Bill Miles. Bill Miles was the first filmmaker I would actually ever met. And through Bill Miles, I was introduced to one of his editors who was standing by to produce a film for the New York City Police Department. This was in 1985. I came to New York in 1984. So I'd been working for a year prior to that, but I'd been in touch with her between 1984 and 1985, just in a normal course of things. And she said to me one day, she got the green light to do the film. It was going to be 12 days of shooting, and that if I was interested, that I could come and work on it with her, and could not afford to pay me, but they could cover my transport. And I said, I'm there. I want the experience of knowing what it's like, to make films. So I took 2 weeks off my job and worked on this police training film. And I literally can say after 3 days of working on it, I knew my life could not be what it was prior to that. I spent in those 12 days total moving through New York City, getting a greater sense of New York City than I had up until that point, having lived in New York for about a year, a little over a year. It was a very liberating sense. The sense of being in production was very liberating. The fact that it exposed me to so many different things within a short period of time felt like who I am. And at that point, I decided that career in the law was not for me. And I handed in my notice when I went back to my job right after that and dived in the deep end, knowing full well that I did not have any deep connections in the business, and discovering this thing was going to be a long journey, discovering how the film industry worked and how you go about getting jobs and so on and so forth. How all that worked, it was a mystery, but I felt willing to stake my future on it.
Wow.
And so that was 1985, and here I am in 2020, and I'm still going at it.
So what challenges came up for you? You already mentioned you didn't really have those connections, and you had to kind of learn from the ground up how to make that work. What kind of challenges came up for you?
Right. So in the very first instance, I wasn't going to go back to school. I had had enough school at that point. So the idea of enrolling in a film program it did not even occur to me to consider that. So I embraced the idea that I was going to work from the ground up. And so what I did was I reached out to people I had worked with on that police training film, and I sort of try to get pointers from them how one would go about pursuing work. How does one grow a community of filmmakers that you could reach out to for work? And it was a slow process, because between the police training film and the next film that I worked on, probably, 3 months or so, a little over 3 months went by. And of course, the doubts creep in, like, what have I done here? But I would say by the end of 1985, there was one particular person I reached out to who introduced me to the production manager at a commercial house that shot food commercials, one of the premier food commercial houses in New York. And I interviewed with the production manager at the end of 85. In the beginning of 86, they hired me to, on a freelance basis. And I worked there for almost 3 years as a PA for the most part. I did jobs with other productions. I did a little bit of documentary PA work. I did a little bit of TV and feature film PA work. But my mainstay around about 1986 through 1988 was on commercials. And that particular production company, which was a production company called Ampersand, was my home for the better part of those years. Now, I'll say also that I knew I was starting at the very bottom,
right,
as a production assistant, but I always knew that my goal was to shoot. So along the way, I sort of had to make these calculations about, it was all a gamble in a lot of ways, and there were people who were very helpful to me along the way. So basically, by 1988, I sort of knew I'd have to sort of pull the plug on assisting at some point. Since I talked about making calculations, I made a calculation that no matter what the best route to being a DP might be, I wanted to be in the camera department. And for the most foolish of reasons, I chose the camera department because I didn't want to get dirty. I didn't want to get dirty in the way that grips and electrics get dirty, either hauling sandbags or wrapping cable and that sort of thing. But I think there was also a psychological part to that choice, which was, sometimes you work with human perceptions, and the perception that the person more likely to be promoted to camera as an operator or as a DP is the person standing next to the camera. So for a combination of those reasons, I chose to pursue the next step as a camera assistant. And I took the test. At the time, we had the two unions in New York. There was BAFTA and there was NABIT. The majority of the people I had worked with as a PA were all in NABIT, and my mentors were all in NABIT. So I joined the union camera department in NABIT in 1988 and began to work, a variety of projects. I began to work more documentary, more music video, because music video was sort of just beginning to come into its own, full-fledged. So I started getting way more experience than just working on commercials. But at the same time, there was also this other paradox that I figured I had to struggle with at some point. If I was going to be a DP, I was going to have to limit the amount of time that I was a camera assistant, keeping in mind that everything along the way from PA to AC to DP was a learning process without the assistance of any formal academic training. So it was all gambles in a way. So when I became an assistant, I knew I would have to start. I gave myself philosophically in my own head 5 or 6 years max as an assistant. And in the meantime, I would try to find ways to become a DP, to start to shoot, to be responsible for creating the images. And part of the reason for that was that in the course of being a PA, I worked with a lot of camera assistants who had been camera assistants for 20, 25, 30 years. And you knew sort of in the back of your head, somewhere along the way, they wanted to make that transition to shooting or operating or something, but they got really comfortable being assistants, making very good money, belonging to a union and having health benefits and all that sort of stuff. So there was always the potential for that trap, if you will. And I decided that I would cut off my career as an assistant somewhere in the range of 5 to 6 years. As it turned out, I think it was about my 5th year that I officially stopped. I think I stopped assisting in 1993. So from 1988 to 1993, I was a camera assistant. But one other thing was starting to happen sort of maybe 3 years in. There were people who I had come up along the way with that were PAs or worked in, some of the other departments that for some magical reason started getting the opportunity to direct. Sorry, I have a loud car going by.
No problem.
There were these people who I had come up with starting to get the opportunity to direct music videos. If there was a sort of entry level into filmmaking at that time, I would say it was music videos, and it was the really low budget music videos. And so that meant that around about 1990, 91, I was being asked to shoot music videos for these people who were friends of mine. And that's where the perception choice I made about being a camera assistant worked out for me. Because they didn't reach out to their gaffer friends. They didn't reach out to their key grip friends. They reached out to the camera assistant because they figured he's next to the camera. He must know a lot about cameras.
Right.
So for about 2 years, I sort of had this overlapping thing where I was assisting, and I was also shooting these really low budget music videos. But then a time came where, maybe it's different today, but I think back then you sort of had to be what you said you were. So I couldn't manage to be an assistant and a DP at the same time for very long if anyone was going to take me seriously.
Got it.
So by about 93, I decided to stop assisting and shoot full time.
Okay.
And so, of course, that was a challenge financially because I had done pretty well as an assistant, worked consistently, made a decent amount of money each year. And so building from scratch as a DP meant earning a living was tough, but I knew it's what I had to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I also knew that the trade-off was the opportunity to build a reel. So I was getting paid less. The work was not necessarily as frequent at the start, but I knew I was building something along the way. So I dived in. I took full advantage of the opportunity, and that's it. I mean, I've been shooting constantly since '93. We've had ups and downs. I've seen at least, excuse me, I've seen at least 4 recessions in my time, in my professional career. And I also know people who did the same thing I did, which was to jump from assisting to shooting, who actually went back to shooting. To assisting or to whatever else they were doing before, because the trade-off was too big financially. I just got it through it. And so I can only see myself moving forward, not moving backwards. So,
would you have any advice for aspiring filmmakers, DPs who are coming up in the business now?
For aspiring filmmakers or for aspiring DPs?
DPs.
For aspiring DPs, I think the primary qualification for a filmmaker, any filmmaker, is passion and commitment. This literally has to be the only thing you would ever want to do in your life, because it's difficult. It's hard. It takes time to build relationships that keep you working constantly, keep you exposed to good projects, interesting projects, and so on and so forth. And so you have to be able to ride the downturns so that you can come up on the other side. And that requires commitment and passion, because both of those things will sustain you when times are tough. Specific to DPs, I believe, and I see one of your questions is about photography and the relationship between photography and cinematography.
Mm-hmm.
I think that whether you're working or not, photography is a thing that you should embrace, whether it's paying any bills or not paying any bills, because it's how you train yourself to see the world in a unique sort of way without having to buy, thousands of dollars worth of film or thousands of dollars worth of digital cinema equipment,
Right.
Whether that camera is a point and shoot camera, whether that camera is a digital camera or a film camera, something that allows you to immerse yourself in the notion of creating mood, atmosphere, the ability to tell a story in a single frame. It's like for any writer, if I were to use writing as an example, I imagine you have the equivalent of a notebook or a journal or something stuck away in your back pocket, whether it's physical journal or it's your mental journal, where you jot interesting things in that you observe, that you either build scenarios or you build characters around. Yeah, it's like filling your grab bag of, photography for me contributes to that grab bag that a photographer should have, visual language that a photographer should have. I think in much the same way, it's a twofold thing, because it's what you do with the camera that's in your hands, and it's also understanding the larger body of photography from its inception to today, so that you build up a visual vocabulary that allows you to discuss ideas and projects with directors or producers. I've had the opportunity to teach class, not on an ongoing basis, but on a visiting basis. And even in this era where our focus primarily on digital photography, I always begin my explorations with the students with the long arc of photography, because I don't disconnect the two. Film and digital are kind of the same to me. They're part of the same family.
Okay.
They may require different mindsets or different attitudes, but they belong to the same family. We're using mechanical objects to create human emotions. And that's something we have always done, no matter how old the camera is, So sometimes we lose the sense of what we're doing when we focus too much on the technology and the mechanics and not enough of an appreciation of the art to which we belong. And the fact that what we are trying to bring to the table is human emotions, a way for human beings to connect to a story.
Okay. Thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about how your photography informs your choices as a cinematographer. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it does two things. Photography does two things for me. Filmmaking is obviously a collaborative pursuit. And, you work, as a cinematographer, I work in support of somebody else's vision. I bring my own ideas, my own unique perspectives, but it is usually in support of somebody else's vision. And that's why I think that visual vocabulary that I'm talking about, that's rooted primarily in photography and that transitions into cinematography, is important, because when you're discussing projects with directors and producers, it's always good and handy to have a point of reference when exchanging visual ideas. Whether that point of reference is directly from photography, it could be from films, could be from painting, could be from any form of visual expression. So photography plays that role for me in filling my sense of my vocabulary of images. The other thing that it does for me is it allows me to fulfill my own singular pursuit of image making, meaning I don't have to talk to anybody else about what I want to capture. All I do is grab my camera, go outside, and I look for images. I look for images that are just not the mundane everyday, but that actually capture a feeling, a mood, something evocative, So yes, imagine this period we're in where we're in a pandemic, and the pandemic suggests that we stay home. If we venture out, we do so gingerly. We cover our faces and so on and so forth. Well, guess who's been going out? Me. And I go out with a camera. I go out with a camera with the desire to record this moment. Not in the same way that you might record it with a cell phone photograph, but to do as I would do at any other time. Stand on a corner and wait for something to come to me.
Okay.
Being able to, developing a sense of, yes, this particular frame says so much more than all the other frames that I could have taken before it. It's a moment in time. I think that helps. It certainly helps my soul, but it also helps me in making those choices when I have to assess a variety of things working with a director, whether it's with location scouting, how to use a location, whether it's natural light, whether it's artificial light, how much movement with the camera and how much staging and so on and so forth. I understand movement in cinematography because it is motion picture after all, and you can't just plonk a camera down in a static position and create a feeling. But I also try to be aware of the possibilities where that can actually happen, where moving the camera is actually a mistake. because it takes your audience out of an emotion. And so, for example, that's a scenario in which photography helps, because you have a sense that this one image that you have the camera framed on is the image that says everything that needs to be said, as opposed to moving the camera right or left, back and forth, and so on and so forth.
Also, I just wanted to ask a little bit about the equipment, your setups and stuff like that. Do you have a favorite camera setup that you usually gravitate towards?
No. I know. Simple answer. No, because I flexibility is very important to me as an individual, as a creator. Flexibility is important. Unless I'm working with look, I take whatever director I'm working with gives me. So if a director is very adamant about certain things, I will work within that framework. If a director gives me flexibility and freedom, I will work within that framework as well. I don't believe anything should be done by rote. I don't think anything should be done, quote, by the book. We can't write new chapters if we keep, sticking to the same plan. So I stay flexible. I own a Canon camera. So in a lot of situations where I'm approached and the second question after "are you available" is "what camera do you own?" I own a Canon. So I suppose in some regards, Canon, I have a Canon C300 Mark II. Mm-hmm. That would, quote, qualify as my favorite setup. But I don't own that camera because, it has any characteristics that are, I own that camera because it's what I could afford at the time. I'll just throw this in as well. The recession of 2007, 2008 was transformative in a way that no other recession I've experienced was. In that, prior to 2007, I actually had the luxury of saying to anyone who would call me and hire me or book me for a job, we'd do a scout, I'd do a lighting order, I'd do a camera order, I'd hand it to a producer, and they would rent the equipment. Never had to think about owning anything. I strongly resisted the idea of owning anything because I didn't want what I owned to dictate what I was shooting with. And up until a certain point, that was true for film as well as digital. Mm-hmm. I have not shot film in a very long time because that's the world we live in today. But I did come from a film background. Film cameras were so much more expensive than digital cameras are. So it would never occur to me as a cinematographer shooting film to actually own a film camera. Just did not compute. So at that point, I had the luxury of, having production rent. Part of what happened after 2007 was, as people realigned, I think the film industry took that harder than it had taken any other recession because our industry was, generally speaking, perceived to be relatively recession-proof. I think the 2007 recession made a lie out of that, and we took a really big hit. And I think as we started to pick up the pieces, companies started looking for ways to get benefits or to, get more for less than had previously been the case, And, say in the run-up to 2007, I worked with some of the cable channels, HBO, Showtime, MTV, VH1. These are companies that, would call, book you, you'd give them your equipment orders, they'd order it. All of a sudden, I started getting calls for availability. And then the next question that followed would be, what equipment do you own? And after I realized I wasn't getting away with not owning equipment, I decided I had to invest in something, And I already owned Canon lenses for my still cameras. So for me, it just made sense to buy a Canon digital cinema camera. Mm-hmm. And part of it is also having had some experience shooting with Panasonic, shooting with Canon, shooting with Sony's, that I, within a certain price range, I just thought that the Canon, especially the C300 Mark II, was the best of the bunch, just in terms of how it rendered colors, and it was within a price range that I could afford. Okay. So I got one of those. So because it's what I own, it's the go-to setup, if you will. Someone called me right now and asked me about shooting something, because the second question would be what I own. That's what I'm going to show up on their location with. If, on the other hand, I have the flexibility to rent something, I consider a variety of different options for certain strengths and certain weaknesses. There's no such thing as a perfect camera setup, in my opinion, especially in the digital era. They all have strengths and weaknesses. I'll say the most fun cameras I've shot with have been the Arri family of cameras. I think they make the best sensors out there. That's just my opinion. And the downside for those cameras, especially before the Mini came along, was their size. So, they have the advantage of having this great sensor, but you start to build them up, they become really bulky. So depending on the kind of scenario you find yourself shooting in, that bulk becomes a disadvantage. So compared to, say, my Canon, which may not have the same kind of latitude and might not be able to handle the highlights much the same way as an Arri Alexa or Mini, in terms of portability, it's a much more portable camera. So, there are these trade-offs that happen, in these choices. Again, flexibility is important too. So I'd say it's important to know the strengths and weaknesses of the varieties of cameras out there. Mm-hmm. And to, as they say on the street, shoot your shot accordingly.
So I'm going to pivot over to lenses. How do you make your lens choices for your projects? Like what makes you choose a particular lens over another?
Okay. I'll just come right out and say I'm a Cook lenses person for the most part. There's a sort of warmth and creamy quality about Cook lenses that I don't know. They render a certain way for me that I don't see in other lenses. Again, that's a personal preference, because Zeiss makes great lenses. Who else are the lens makers out there? Ingenus make great lenses. So just for me, I don't own Cook lenses; they're too expensive. So, but no, when I was a PA, I got exposed to Cook early on, because the director, who was also the camera person, the cinematographer at that company I worked at, his go-to lenses were Cooks, and we'd bring other lenses in, rent lenses for specific things or specific purposes. So I got to see a lot of side-by-sides. I used to rack up dailies that was one of my things, was I racked up dailies for them to watch in this, to be able to show to clients what takes they liked and what takes they didn't like. So I got to spend some time listening, to the things that mattered. And I always found myself drawn to Cook lenses for some reason. Now, choices of lenses I make depends on who I'm working with. So, say for example, in the documentary genre, I work with directors that want to change. They want to change the frame every time they're asking a question. And the only way I can do that without the aid of a dolly is with a zoom lens. So when I'm working with the directors I know like to work that way, I can't consider primes. Because they don't want to sit on the same frame, right, for a given subject. They want, when they cut from one thing to another within that particular person's interviews, they want the frame to be different. So in a lot of those scenarios, I work strictly with zoom lenses. Then there are other directors who, they want two cameras and they'll put a prime on each camera and let that be the thing for them. So, it really depends on, again, as you get to work with the same people over and over again, which is always rewarding, by the way, you begin to learn their idiosyncrasies and you begin to tailor your approach to the individual. I think that, again, that's where flexibility is important. I'm a team player. So it requires that I pay attention carefully to what works with one person that might not work with another person. So I have to be open. I have to be open about the choices that I make. I may have certain built-in preferences for my own self, and I might actually advocate for those with a particular collaborator. But I also give deference to the way they like to work.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, it's a bit evasive, my answer, but one thing I'll just underline everything that I have said by saying that I don't subscribe to absolutes in anything in life, and I think that also affects how I approach what I do professionally. I don't, if someone says, "Oh, this is the best camera on the market," or "This is the best lens," that's a personal opinion. So I don't subscribe to those things at all. I think that you pick up things along the way. There are things that inform your sensibilities along the way, but you always have to be open to the possibility that, there's a better way or there's a different way. And if you want to make something unique, you have to deviate sometimes from your plan, from what you know. Sometimes jazz music is a great metaphor for me in life and in what I do professionally, right? Because my interpretation of jazz music is the permission to free yourself from cliches. So you can either adopt the cliche or you can free yourself from the cliche. You have the freedom to do that in jazz music. And I try to embrace that in my profession. That yes, maybe sometimes the cliche is a good thing. And then there are other times when the cliche is boring. The cliche is safe. So, I want to ride by the seat of my pants because that's when something magical happens.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I like that answer. So I have a few other questions, but
yes, please feel free. Ask everything you sent me.
You've gotten a chance to do DP on documentaries with subjects such as Barack Obama, Gordon Parks, Nikki Barnes, James Baldwin, and the list goes on. What lessons do you take from doing documentaries about these subjects? Do you take any lessons or?
Well, one of the beauties of documentaries is you're always you learn things. You learn things you didn't know. You learn things you learn that things you thought you knew, you don't really know a whole lot about. So working on documentaries is like going to school. I did a documentary last year with Sam Pollard. We got our equipment from TCS. Thank you very much. It was about Black visual artists, and it wasn't. And while the focus of the documentary was on contemporary Black visual artists, it also embraced the arc of Black visual artists in America. And I have embraced the idea of doing research as part of my job. So I'm not content to just show up with a camera and, plop a tripod somewhere and aim the camera in a particular direction. I try to immerse myself in the subject matter if there is enough material out there on the particular subject matter. So I do research. And, sometimes it's just to give me an overall scope of the subject matter that I'm working in. Sometimes, depending on the literature, I go even further. But it's all a part of learning. for me. That's what documentaries do for me. Like going to school, and I haven't been disappointed yet. I'm gonna tell this story this way. I'm gonna give this answer this way. You know, you set out on a journey, you have no idea where it's gonna take you. As a young kid, I lived in Nigeria as a young kid. And in Nigeria, in my household, we got Time and Newsweek, and we got Life magazine. And I was somewhat aware of a gentleman named Gordon Parks as a teenager. I became even more aware of Gordon Parks when, as a teenager, I went to see a film called Shaft. Right? It was like a big group date movie thing that I went on. So imagine how fulfilling it is for this teenager to have come full circle and work on a documentary about Gordon Parks' life. Couldn't ask for more. I mean, I really couldn't. And he was such a generous person with his time, with his emotions, you know, everything. It was it was really gratifying to see this aspect of my life materialize in that way that I could never ever have predicted. And in addition to making a film about him, and this is no hyperbole. It may have been, you may read articles here and books there, and they tell you things about this man and, you know, how groundbreaking a man he was. I worked on 3 projects with Gordon Parks in the latter part of his life. One of them was part of a Channel 4 UK thing. That was actually the first time that I shot with him. And in a strange way, that one day of shooting with him led to me, in part, to me working on the HBO documentary, Half Past Autumn, which we worked on and off for about a year. And then I did something else with Warrington Hudlin, Ozzie Davis, Melvin Van Peebles, and Gordon Parks. Those are 3 things that I worked on. Got to spend time around him. But I, on and off, got to spend a year around Gordon Parks while shooting Half Past Autumn. And I came to understand that the man was, relatively speaking, was fearless. Fearless, not in the sense of I'm going to war, I might get shot. Fearless in the sense that he was willing to put himself in situations that were unfamiliar to him and learn from it and grow with it, you know. And again, you know, if being flexible is a theme that I keep coming back to, I see a guy like Gordon Parks and I say, wow, you know, that's the reason you have to be flexible, because you can't have some of the experiences you've had in life the way that a Gordon Parks has if everything that you ever did was by the book. You have to take chances. He was a very courageous guy. And that actually was the biggest lesson I got working on that project, because that lesson came directly from him, from observing him, from listening to him. You know, it may or may not come across to anybody in that documentary, but that's what I got from it. I can give you an example.
Yes, please.
I remember one day we were in his living room, we were shooting. There was a segment in the film where he's creating music with these 2 collaborators. And one is at an electronic keyboard and the other is at a cello. And after we were done shooting, the cellist was telling us a story about the provenance of the cello. Cello is a 400-year-old cello made in a village in Italy, and they've been making these cellos for, you know, God knows how long. And next thing I knew, Gordon Parks had the cello, grabbed the cello, had it between his legs, and he started playing. I don't think the man had ever played a cello in his life.
No.
And he didn't suck. And that said to me, you know, he's in the midst of all these people and he could have embarrassed himself by attempting to play this instrument he's never played before. But he didn't care about that. He cared about the experience and was willing to put himself in a compromised position, and I actually rolled the camera for part of it. I did, but the sound person wasn't rolling sound, which is probably why I didn't make it into the film. But that moment was an example of, wow, you know what? This guy is fearless in his own way. He is fearless. And that's the biggest lesson that I took away working on that documentary, more so than actually working on the documentary itself.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer.
No problem.
So can you talk a little bit about your upcoming projects? You mentioned the Sam Pollard project that you worked on last year.
Yes. So I'm actually standing by to do color correction on the project that I worked on with Sam Pollard last year. We started out, it didn't have a title. It appears the title now it's going to be called Black Art in the Absence of Light. It's a project for HBO, and what it does is it explores the sort of highlights. It's been I'd say the last 10, 15 years has been sort of a boom time for Black artists in America. Part of the difficulty making the film was deciding who to focus on in the film. But these are choices that are made way above my head, so I just go along with them. But the attempt is also to connect those people to a lineage of Black arts practice in America that goes way back past 200 years. I think the film, if we had not been disrupted by this virus, the film probably would be airing this summer. But at this moment, I don't know what the target is for that. And in working, this was also one of those opportunities to flex a little bit, if I can use another colloquialism, because some cases what would normally happen is we're going to shoot a bunch of interviews. I bring my Canon, I bring my lenses. This was a film about art. So we decided to craft something, to deliberately craft something for this particular project. And TCS was wonderfully helpful in allowing us to come in and to test 2 camera systems and a plethora of lenses. So we tested the Canon C300 against the Arri Mini. And even though I think from my eye, the Arri Mini had a superior rendering compared to the Canon, we had to make an economic choice between the two. Was it enough of a difference for us to do the entire project? We were going to be shooting 2 cameras. Would it be enough? Would it be a significant enough difference for us using 2 Arri Minis versus using 2 Canons? And we made an aesthetic choice that we could shoot with the Canons so that we could afford a greater variety of lenses. And so we looked at the footage we shot. We decided which lenses we liked. They had a particular quality characteristic. And the artists that we worked with, that we focused on, sort of broke down along different lines. There are those that were known for their paintings. There are those that were known for their photography. There are those that were known for their installation work. And our approach was to group them accordingly and assign them certain lenses and certain lighting styles so that they belong in the same family. So if you saw more shadow in the lighting, it's because they were primarily installation artists. If the lighting was softer, it was because they were painters. And if the lighting, if it was a mix of soft light and lenses that vignetted, it's because they're photographers. So we sort of looked for ways to delineate between these different practices and still keep it within the same film. And the other thing too that was significant, then also we had commentators, people who comment on art, who study art. And we decided we would shoot those people with a specific choice of lenses, and the lighting would be predominantly soft for them. And we shot them against backgrounds so that they would be the only people in the film that you would see interviewed in front of backgrounds. Everybody else we shot in some location on. And so for me, it fulfilled a lot because there's certain cliches about documentaries. And one of those, for example, is matching lighting from, one interview to the next. I find that that's a cliche I'm not too comfortable with because I look at everybody as fundamentally a portrait subject. And to do a portrait subject justice, you look for something that's unique to them, and then you photograph them accordingly. So this particular documentary for me was a blessing because it allowed me to do that. It allowed me, and I had Sam's complete freedom and support to do that, to craft the look that would be unique to this particular film.
Right.
And we would not necessarily do this for any other film. So, so there was that. And then also, I'm working on, at the time I started working on it, this project was sort of semi-secret. I believe it's public now, but I had the opportunity, I was invited again by Raoul Peck to work with him on another piece. This one also is for HBO, and it is a 4-part series. And it explores the connection between white supremacy and colonialism. It's tentatively titled "Exterminate the Brutes," which is a quote from Joseph Conrad's book "Art of Darkness." For anyone who might have seen Apocalypse Now, that particular quote is referenced a few times but that film is based on the writings of 3 scholars, and I think I should talk a little bit about working with Raoul Peck because, that's always been a sort of unique experience for me.
Yes, please.
I've done 2 films with him. The first being Am Not Your Negro, and the second one that we're still working on. I'm sort of most of my portion of it is done, but there's still some stuff to do. We sort of came to a halt because of the pandemic. But Raoul Peck is a director I've always admired from the first time I became aware of him, which was a documentary that he did about Patrice Lumumba called Death of a Prophet. Footage primarily in black and white and told in a sort of very poetic style, which is the way that Raoul likes to work. I had run into Raoul in New York and sometime in 2015. I'd met him before. So first time I met Raoul, I had to shoot an acceptance speech that for an award ceremony he would not be able to attend. So shot this acceptance speech it was for a festival called the Black Panther Film Festival, which I don't know if it's still happening, but I think this was in 2003 I shot that acceptance speech for him. At the end of shooting him, he had this film out called Lumumba, which was a feature film based on Patrice Lumumba's life. So he'd done a documentary and a feature film, and the film's exceptional. And I remember I sort of fawned all over him, because of it. And then I asked him what he was working on. How come he wasn't going to be able to attend the ceremony? He said, well, I'm going to be in Rwanda scouting locations for a film I'm making for HBO about the genocide in Rwanda. And, so I won't be able to attend. So I was like, wow, interesting, cool. Fast forward to 2004, I got a call sometime in about June, July 2004. And this is from HBO, Creative Services Department, who I did promos for. And someone that asked me if I'd ever been to Africa. Yes, the answer to that question. Have you ever been to Rwanda? No, I've never been to Rwanda. What's happening in Rwanda? Raoul Peck is shooting a film in Rwanda. We need someone to shoot behind the scenes. I was like, oh my God, how does this happen? So I went and spent 2 weeks shooting behind the scenes in Rwanda for this film called Sometime in April, which is about the Rwandan genocide. Raoul Peck's film, Sometimes in April, about the Rwandan genocide, stands alongside Hotel Rwanda. Hotel Rwanda came out, I think it was at the end of 2004, no, the end of 2003. And Sometimes in April came out. I'm getting my dates mixed up. I was in Rwanda in 2003. Sometimes in April, Hotel Rwanda came out at the end of 2003, and Sometimes in April came out in April 2004. And that was to mark the 10th anniversary of the genocide. You look at those two films, one of those films functions on a tragic, hopeful level, and the other film works on a tragic, we better get our act together level. With a kind of brute honesty, with the thread of hope that we could transform our circumstance. One is a commercial film, the other one is almost a documentary. The documentary-like film is Raoul's film. I think if you look at both films side by side, you get a much more realistic sense of what it's like to be caught in a genocide from Raoul's film. So that added to my respect for him as a filmmaker. And then I ran into Raoul in 2015 in New York. He was screening another film of his. Brilliant film, as usual. And I just happened to say to him, Raoul, I saw we've been around each other all these years, and I've never actually worked for you. And Raoul patted me on the shoulder and said, it's all right, it'll happen. He just like, it'll happen. It'll happen. Don't worry about it. And so I come around to 2016. I'm working on a web series out on the streets in Brooklyn, and I get a phone call from Raoul's brother, who I've never met. And I couldn't answer the phone. He left me a message. And when I listened to the message, he said, Raoul asked me to check and see if you would like to possibly meet with him about a project. And the project's about James Baldwin. Ooh, two names in one request. That was a no-brainer for me.
Yeah.
So I knew immediately I was going to do that. I met with Raoul. He showed me a draft of what he was looking at trying to accomplish with that film. And then about maybe a month after meeting with him, they're like, okay, here's what Raoul needs you to shoot. Go out and shoot it. And I had the freedom, with his guidance, to go out and capture images that were not of people talking about James Baldwin, but of images that supported the text and the thrust that James Baldwin presented us with.
Right.
It's a lot different than how, if that film was made in America, we would have gotten a bunch of historians together to tell us why James Baldwin mattered.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a refreshing experience to work on a project where nobody was talking about James Baldwin. It was all James Baldwin doing the talking. And I was tasked to find images to support certain moods, certain themes, certain ideas throughout that narrative.
Can I ask you a follow-up question about that?
Yes.
Well, how did you make those choices of what images you were going to show throughout the film?
Okay, so, Raoul's very meticulous. Like, he literally, some documentary filmmakers have ideas of who, and sometimes it's a lot easier when you're interviewing people about a subject. You can just drop a list of questions that you think you need to ask them that are relevant to the subject. Raoul's way of working is he creates a Bible of sorts, where he sort of positions images alongside of the basic narrative text for the documentary. So Raoul sent me several pages of text versus suggested images. And then he sent me out to scout locations in New York. So I scouted locations to find what I could that matched what he envisioned, and then shot some other, still photos of alternatives to what he considered. And then he basically would just go through it and say, okay, I like this, I like that. Try and see if you can find me something different for this, and so on and so forth. And then just turn me loose. And I shot for over a 2-week period in and around New York, New Jersey, looking for images that fit his request. And some of them were, I was capturing those images as exact matches to what he imagined, either because there was a pre-existing reference image, and I just went to the same location and found that image, or the modern equivalent of it. And there were cases where the mood was the important thing, and he sent me out to go look for that mood, which, requires an incredible amount of trust, which I appreciate. That's something I get from him is, I'm just giving you the parameters, and you go use your, soul and your brain and come back with the images that you think can help me convey this idea,
Right.
There's a shot, I know in your questions, there's reference to, rain and so on and so forth. Some of that stuff I didn't shoot. I shot equivalents in New York, but there was another team shooting in the South. And some of those images were their images.
Okay.
But there's this image we shot of a swimming pool and the ripples in the swimming pool. And the way the ripples change, the light changes as the ripples come through. It sort of reminds you of a David Hockney painting, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
And it's set in a scene where, in the narration itself, James Baldwin is describing how he was at a villa in LA, sitting by the pool, and he was working on a screenplay based on the autobiography of Malcolm X, when he got a call saying that Martin Luther King had been shot, and he wasn't dead yet, but he wasn't expected to live. And so we could have gotten ourselves some villa on Long Island, and, something to approximate this villa that he was referring to. But we found a pool, and we pointed the camera at the pool, and we just let the magic of sunlight hitting water and reacting. It's almost hypnotic, because at the very end of that narrative sequence, James Baldwin says something along the lines that he was just numb. He could not say anything for the rest of the day. And so you're watching this pool, this water doing this thing with light, this dance that they were doing. And you did not need context, location-wise,
Right.
other than his words. That image of a pool, the surface of the water, was enough. That's Raul. That is Raul. Raul will go for that any day over, the more obvious depiction of the scenario that's being spoken of.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so, of course, I'm working on this project with him. Whatever portions of it I am tasked to do, we will resume once we're able to, get clarification on what's open and what's not. But, we shot in New York, we shot in Connecticut, we shot in Virginia, we shot in California. And none of it is images with anybody talking about anything. It's visual representations of certain text that forms the basis of this particular documentary.
Thank you. And please keep us up to date on when, those films are going to be coming out.
I most definitely will.
Yeah.
I most definitely will.
And another question is, where can anyone who's interested find your photography or, some of your work?
Yes, I have a website. It is www.henryadebonojo.co. I used to have a .com, but I changed my platform, and in the course of changing it, I couldn't hold on to the .com, so I wound up with a .co. So it's My first and last name .co.
Okay, thank you. And thank you.
I have some short clips from documentaries, and then I have photographs as well.
Thank you so much for your time.
No problem at all.
And we really appreciate this.
Anything else that you want? Anything else on your list that?
Let me see.
Oh yeah, questions about Spike Lee.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, so I need to. I should talk about Spike. Okay. You know, obviously, Spike is the reason I have a relationship with TCS, because back in my very first encounter with TCS was as a camera assistant when Ernest Dickerson used to shoot for Spike. And Ernest Dickerson would get equipment out of TCS, and I would go and check out equipment at TCS. So, again, I can't remember sort of what years. I'm saying probably the early 90s.
Yeah.
Yep. So I've had that. I had that one relationship on the one hand with TCS, and now here I am as a DP, and with the opportunity to work with TCS. I don't necessarily get to do it all the time, but when I can, I'm thankful for it. I appreciate the support I get when I come into TCS, and the willingness to get for me what I need, even when it may not be available on hand. So, yes, I started working with Spike on my first official job with Spike was a music video for Fight the Power, which was on the soundtrack of Do the Right Thing. And, but my first film encounter with Spike was on No Better Blues. I was a camera assistant on that. And so, of course, over the years, my relationship with Spike has transformed from, outer circle to inner circle. I haven't shot any of Spike's films as a DP. I've worked on some of them as an operator. I've worked on a lot of multi-camera shoots with Spike. And again, the more unique a filmmaker is, the more unique the experiences you're going to get with them. And I think, Spike's a very spiritual man. And I don't necessarily mean that in religious terms, just he's a spiritual man. And some experiences you have working with Spike, you're not going to get anywhere else, because he's open to tapping into things that the unexpected, Mm-hmm. I love doing the multi-camera shows with him, because again, you're flying by the seat of your pants. Sometimes sometimes we have a plan, and then sometimes he wants one person to go and find magic. And sometimes that person is me. Sometimes that person is one of the other camera people. But he's a very unique filmmaker, and I feel fortunate to have known him all these years, and to I don't there's gaps that go through time wise working with him, but every couple of years I get a call out of the blue. Spike's got something going on. And I know to expect a kind of energy working on anything with Spike that I won't necessarily get anywhere. It's like being part of a band, like being a musician in a band. That's kind of like a New Orleans street band that's improvising.
Yeah.
You just get in where you fit in, and yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and yes, we did the Kickstarter film, Sweet Blood of Jesus. It actually broke his previous record of She's Gotta Have It in terms of the amount of time that we shot. I think we shot it in 1 day less than he did. I think She's Gotta Have It was 17 days. We did Sweet Blood of Jesus in 16 days. Spike was acutely aware that he was working with limited resources. And so he was very meticulous about what he wanted. And believe it or not, even though we only shot for 16 days, None of those days exceeded. The only day that went long was the last day. And that was because Spike had scheduled the 17th day, but we had done so well on the 16th day. He asked us if we would work a little bit longer to get the 17th day in on the 16th day, and then we just have the 17th day free. And everybody agreed to do it. So I think that day was probably a 17 hour day. But the other days were routine 12 hours. He just, he was just very, very tight. I think on that particular film, because he knew the limitations we were working with, given that it was a crowdsourced budget. And I think he didn't want to, in making that film, even though he was acknowledging there was sort of an update on Ganja and Hess, I don't think he set out to mimic that film in any way. So his treatment of the subject matter was designed to be contemporary, a contemporary look at that film. So I think Ganja and Hess was made in 74, something like that. So, we're talking, so many years later, 40-something years later. So I don't think he wanted to necessarily mirror that in any way. The inspiration came from that, but it was a more contemporary at that same story.
Thank you for that. Actually, I did have one question.
Yes.
I know we touched upon a lot of different subjects and stuff like that, but is there anything we haven't spoken about that you wanted to speak about?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think so. I think the only thing I can reiterate is just, we are, as filmmakers, authenticity and individuality is important. And I think, it's our lives in filmmaking are a journey, and we add to who we are as we go along. In order to bring something special to what we do. And so I just say to anybody out there, try to be true to yourself, but also try to be open, because your inspirations sometimes come from the least expected places. And sometimes you experience the kind of magic under those circumstances that you never experience anywhere else.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much for this time, Henry. We really, really appreciate you.
No problem.
I want to also thank the whole social media team that helped put this together. Stephanie, Rachel, Dan Kincaid, Brian, Sarah, Tim West. Really appreciate it. If you like what you heard, please like, share, subscribe, comment below. Follow us for more content like this. Until next time, we hope to see you at checkout. Bye, everyone.
There's a certain amount of satisfaction that derives from working on films like I'm Not Your Negro, where you feel that you are contributing to the dialogue in your own way that hopefully makes our human family a better human family. Or in the case of, say, the Gordon Parks film, Half Past Autumn, where you're contributing to the storytelling of a man who was so strong in spirit as an individual, and yet was so connected to his role in the world in terms of shaping better outcomes. Yeah, those are things that have been beneficial to me as an individual, being part of the film community. And it's what I look forward to, making films that make a difference.